It was supposed to be an ordinary evening in one of the most exclusive restaurants in San Francisco. The chandeliers glowed, the waiters moved with quiet precision, and the city's elite enjoyed their meals without a care in the world. But in a matter of seconds, that calm was shattered. For armed men stormed through the doors, their voices echoing like thunder, demanding silence and obedience. Panic spread like wildfire. Wealthy diners froze in fear, clutching their pearls and wallets. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, one person did not move. A 15-year-old black teenager sat quietly, his eyes calm, his presence strangely unshaken. No one understood why. Not yet. But what he carried within him would expose secrets far more dangerous than guns. And when the truth surfaced, no one would ever see him the same way again. Before we start, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Before the world ever knew his name, Ethan Cole was just another teenager walking the crowded sidewalks of San Francisco. At 15, he looked like any other high school student. Backpacks slung over one shoulder, uniform shirt wrinkled from a long day, sneakers scuffed from running between classes. To strangers, he blended in easily. But those who looked closer saw something unusual in him. There was a steadiness in his gaze, a kind of quiet awareness that made him seem older than his years. While other kids joked loudly or scrolled endlessly on their phones, Ethan seemed to observe everything around him, as if life itself were a battlefield he was trained to study. He grew up in a modest apartment on the edge of the city, raised by his widowed mother after his father, Colonel Nathaniel Cole, passed away under circumstances that were never fully explained. Neighbors whispered about it, teachers offered sympathetic smiles, and classmates sometimes teased him for being too serious. Ethan rarely responded. Instead, he carried his father's lessons like armor, short phrases, strategies, and reminders that had been drilled into him since childhood. His father had believed discipline was not punishment, but protection. And Ethan, even as a boy, had believed it too. At school, his grades were above average but not spectacular. Teachers described him as focused but reserved. He was polite, respectful, yet somewhat distant. Never the loudest voice in the room, but never overlooked either. On weekends, he played basketball at the community court, often outsmarting stronger players with sharp awareness rather than brute force. Still, to most people, he was nothing more than a quiet kid who kept to himself. But beneath that surface, there was something different, something even he did not fully reveal. Ethan had grown up surrounded by his father's old notebooks, encrypted files, and stories of men who fought battles no one ever read about in the news. His father's death left a hole in his life, but it also left a fire, questions that haunted him, secrets that demanded answers. He knew his father had not simply collapsed from natural causes. He had seen the autopsy photos, the inconsistencies, the subtle evidence no one wanted to acknowledge. His father had died for a reason, and one day, Ethan promised himself, the truth would come to light. On the evening of the incident, Ethan was doing something perfectly ordinary. He had stopped by the Imperial Rose, an upscale restaurant in the heart of the city, known for its golden chandeliers and velvet-lined booths. It wasn't the kind of place he normally went. But fate has a way of placing people exactly where they are meant to be. That night, Ethan found himself seated in a quiet corner, enjoying the simple comfort of a cheeseburger, fries, and a glass of soda. To the waiters, he was just a student treating himself after a long day. To the wealthy patrons scattered across the room, he was invisible. Just another kid who didn't belong in their world of crystal glasses and expensive wines. Among those patrons was Cassandra Whitmore, a name almost everyone in the city knew. She was the powerful CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, a company worth billions of dollars. Cassandra was everything Ethan was not: polished, influential, untouchable. She sat surrounded by assistants and bodyguards, dining in luxury, her presence commanding whispers and stolen glances. For her, this evening was supposed to be another demonstration of power, another reminder that she belonged to an elite class of people who rarely face consequences. But within the walls of that restaurant, worlds that were never meant to collide were about to crash violently together. The teenager no one noticed would soon become the center of a storm. The powerful woman who thought she controlled every outcome would find herself stripped of certainty. And four men, armed, desperate, and reckless, would be the spark that lit the fire. As Ethan quietly chewed his food, he felt it before it happened. The shift in the air, the way silence pressed down unnaturally hard. His father had taught him to sense danger not just through sight or sound, but through atmosphere. And that night he sensed it. Seconds later, the doors burst open, and everything changed. For most diners, the robbers' entrance was a nightmare, an unthinkable interruption to their lives of comfort. But for Ethan, it was something else. It was the beginning of a chain of events that felt strangely inevitable, as if his father's voice had been guiding him here all along. This wasn't just about survival. It was about truth, about legacy, about confronting a system where race, power, and money often dictated who lived in fear and who thrived in silence. And on that night, in the middle of the Imperial Rose, a 15-year-old boy who had been invisible to nearly everyone would become impossible to ignore. The moment the restaurant doors crashed open, the Imperial Rose transformed from a sanctuary of wealth into a cage of fear. For men in black masks stormed in, their weapons raised, their shouts slicing through the air like sirens. Panic erupted instantly. Dishes shattered to the floor, waiters ducked behind tables, and the soft hum of polite conversation dissolved into chaos. The robbers barked orders. Phones on the tables, wallets where they could see them, silence or else. In that instant, the glittering chandeliers above seemed less like decorations and more like mocking reminders of how fragile luxury truly was. No amount of money, no title, no power could shield the terrified diners now. Among them sat Cassandra Whitmore, the woman everyone recognized but no one dared approach without permission. The billionaire CEO had built her empire on dominance, on the belief that she was untouchable. Yet here, with a gun pressed against her shoulder, even she was reduced to the same trembling silence as everyone else. One of the masked men hissed at her, demanding an immediate transfer of $30 million. For perhaps the first time in years, Cassandra's control slipped. But in the far corner of the restaurant, one figure didn't tremble, didn't cry, didn't bow his head. Ethan Cole sat with his half-eaten cheeseburger, his posture calm, his eyes steady. The robbers noticed him quickly. His refusal to comply made him stand out. "Phone. Now!" one barked, pointing his gun at the boy. Ethan looked up, his expression unflinching. And with a voice that carried more weight than anyone expected, he told them the truth. He had already triggered the silent alarm beneath his table. Police were already on their way. The robbers laughed cruelly, mocking the arrogance of a child. The diners glanced at each other in disbelief. Who was this teenager who dared to challenge men with guns? Why wasn't he afraid? The truth was, Ethan had lived with fear long enough to understand how to master it. His father had taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to act despite it. And in this moment, those lessons ignited within him. The leader leaned closer, taunting him. Ethan's mind replayed his father's words. A soldier who observes before acting is always 5 steps ahead. In a flash, Ethan kicked his table forward. A bottle of hot sauce tipped over, splattering directly into one robber's eyes. The man screamed, stumbling back, weapon wavering. In the confusion, Ethan grabbed a chair and hurled it upward, smashing into the chandelier above. The massive fixture came crashing down, glass exploding across the room, sparks flying as the lights shattered. The chaos deepened. Diners screamed, robbers shouted, and smoke filled the air. But Ethan wasn't finished. He seized a fire extinguisher from the wall, blasting 2 of the assailants in a cloud of white foam, blinding and disorienting them. He moved quickly, darting between overturned tables with a precision that seemed almost rehearsed. Each motion was calculated, controlled. He wasn't reacting, he was executing a strategy. Cassandra, still pinned under threat, could only stare in disbelief. Who was this boy? Why did he move with the confidence of someone far older? Then came the sound everyone had been waiting for. Sirens wailing outside, growing louder by the second. The robbers cursed, their plan unraveling. And in that pivotal moment, Ethan revealed something that shocked Cassandra even more. He wasn't just an ordinary schoolboy. He was the son of Colonel Nathaniel Cole, a decorated military officer who had died under suspicious circumstances. And Ethan wasn't alone. His father's allies, veterans who had never abandoned their commander, had been watching over him in secret. Within moments, 3 trained men stormed into the restaurant. With swift, practiced movements, they subdued the remaining robbers, securing weapons and forcing them to the ground just as police swarmed through the doors. The diners erupted in relief, but for Cassandra, relief gave way to suspicion. Her sharp eyes had caught something others missed. Ethan's school bag, lying open on the floor, filled not with books, but with classified documents, encrypted files, and a folder stamped with the words Operation Silent Truth. Why would a teenager carry evidence tied to the military? Why was he really here tonight? That question lingered as the police escorted witnesses outside. Cassandra gave her statement, but her mind raced. Later, behind closed doors, she ordered her lawyers to investigate Ethan Cole. What they uncovered shook even her. Colonel Nathaniel Cole had been preparing to expose corruption linked to Helios Dynamics, a defense contractor that once partnered with her company, before his sudden death. For Ethan, the incident at the restaurant wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was the beginning of something larger, something that reached into the shadows of money, power, and betrayal. Cassandra realized with a chill that this boy hadn't just survived a robbery. He had used it. And now, the war between them had only begun. The Imperial Rose robbery faded from the headlines within days, dismissed as another attempted heist in a city accustomed to crime. But beneath that surface, a battle was forming. Ethan was no longer invisible. Cassandra was no longer untouchable. And the evidence Ethan carried would soon force the world to choose sides. Because the truth wasn't just dangerous. It was unstoppable. The robbery had ended, but the true battle had only just begun. For Ethan, the chaos inside the Imperial Rose was never the real fight. It was the opening move. And Cassandra Whitmore, the untouchable CEO, was about to realize that the boy she dismissed as ordinary carried a weapon far deadlier than any gun. The truth. Days later, in the polished silence of her office overlooking the San Francisco skyline, Cassandra sifted through confidential reports her legal team had uncovered. Ethan Cole was no accident. He was the son of Colonel Nathaniel Cole, a soldier who had once investigated corruption at Helios Dynamics, a contractor she herself had quietly invested millions into. And the evidence suggested Nathaniel's death had been no tragedy. It had been silenced. Cassandra's hands tightened around the papers. A child had no right to threaten her empire. And yet, here he was, forcing her into a corner she never thought she'd see. The next morning, a letter appeared under her office door. Neat, controlled handwriting spelled out a request for a private meeting. No phone calls, no lawyers, just her and the boy. Against every instinct, Cassandra agreed. They met at a quiet cafe away from the downtown towers, a place stripped of the wealth and pretense she surrounded herself with. Ethan arrived with his backpack, sliding into the chair across from her with the composure of someone twice his age. From inside, he placed a folder on the table. Cassandra flipped it open. Autopsy reports, forensic photos, toxicology results. Every page screamed one truth. Colonel Nathaniel Cole had been poisoned. Her stomach twisted as Ethan's calm voice filled the silence. He wanted her controlling shares of Helios transferred into a charitable trust for veterans, 51%. Cassandra scoffed, calling it childish. But Ethan slid another paper forward, and this time her heart stopped. It was a draft article written by Daniel Price, an award-winning investigative journalist. The headline read, "Millionaire CEO covered up the murder of a military hero." The folder contained more emails, financial records, and names of executives tied to her company. If this story went public, it wouldn't just dent her reputation. It would destroy her. For the first time in decades, Cassandra felt fear claw at her chest. But she wasn't the kind of woman who surrendered. Instead, she launched her counterattack. Within days, the media was flooded with stories painting Ethan as a disturbed teenager. Journalists whispered about his trauma, his instability, his obsession with conspiracy theories. Television panels questioned whether he was dangerous, unstable, or even delusional. For most 15-year-olds, the weight of that smear campaign would have been unbearable. But Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he countered with something Cassandra could not anticipate: a simple video. In it, he looked directly into the camera, his voice steady, his words stripped of polish. He spoke about his father, the sacrifices he made, the corruption he uncovered, and the truth that had cost him his life. The video went viral. Millions watched. Comments poured in, people comparing Ethan to the very soldiers his father had served with, young, brave, unwilling to surrender. Public sympathy swung toward him like a tidal wave. Cassandra's carefully built image began to crack. Behind the scenes, Ethan wasn't fighting alone. His father's old allies had rallied. Gabriel Torres, a cyber warfare specialist, hacked into servers to retrieve evidence Cassandra thought erased. Elijah Burns, a former intelligence operative, tracked her backroom deals and intercepted her bribes. Every time she tried to silence a witness, Ethan was already one step ahead. It wasn't improvisation. It was a plan years in the making, laid out by a father who knew the cost of exposing powerful enemies. Cassandra tried everything: legal threats, bribes, intimidation, but the walls were closing in. Each move she made only tightened the noose. Ethan was no longer the quiet boy in a school uniform. He had become the embodiment of his father's unfinished fight. The breaking point came late one evening when Cassandra was forced to sign the documents. Under overwhelming public and legal pressure, she transferred her shares of Helios Dynamics into the veterans' trust Ethan demanded. But she believed that would be the end of it. She believed the boy would vanish, satisfied with his symbolic victory. She was wrong. Ethan made it clear. The transfer was only one step. The truth would still come out. Daniel Price's article was ready, and its publication would not only destroy Cassandra's empire but reveal the rot at the core of Helios itself. And when the article finally dropped, its headline ripped across every screen in America: "The millionaire who betrayed a soldier." The fallout was instant. FBI investigations, plummeting stock prices. Board members are turning on Cassandra to save themselves. And then the final blow, an indictment not just for fraud and conspiracy, but for her direct involvement in the poisoning of Colonel Nathaniel Cole. Cassandra Whitmore, the woman who believed she was untouchable, was led away in handcuffs. Her face, once framed by power and admiration, is now plastered across the news as a symbol of greed and betrayal. And Ethan? He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He stood quietly in the aftermath, the weight of victory heavy on his young shoulders. He had dismantled an empire, but the cost was carved deep into his heart. Because justice had been served, but it could never bring his father back. The boy who once sat invisible in the corner of a restaurant had now changed the course of history. And yet, one question remained: had the war truly ended, or had it only just begun? The restaurant was quiet again, but it wasn't the same. The whispers had faded, the plates had been cleared, yet the memory of what happened still clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Jordan sat at the edge of his hospital bed, his hands trembling, not from weakness, but from the weight of what he had just lived through. His body carried bruises, but his spirit carried scars that were far deeper. He replayed the night over and over again, searching for the answer to a question that haunted him. Why? Why had he been targeted, not for something he did, but for something he was? His skin, his identity, his existence. And yet, as he looked up and saw his mother by his side, her eyes red from crying, but her hands strong as they held his, he realized something. They hadn't broken him. They tried to strip away his dignity, but they only made his truth louder. The men who attacked him were eventually caught, their faces plastered across news stations, their hate exposed for the world to see. But this wasn't just about them. This wasn't just about one night in one restaurant. It was about the thousands of silent stories that never make the news. Stories of young men and women who endure slurs, side eyes, and closed doors every single day. Without cameras, without headlines, without justice. For Jordan, the attack was a wound. But it also became a mirror, showing society something it often tries to ignore. Because what happened to him was not rare. It was simply visible. It was recorded, talked about, and shared. But how many others suffer unseen? When Jordan finally stood before his community weeks later, his voice still shaky, but his spirit firm, he said something that silenced the room. They wanted me to feel small, but all they did was prove how big our voices need to be. Those words spread far beyond his city. Schools repeated them in assemblies. Activists printed them on posters. Strangers online sent messages of solidarity. For the first time, Jordan realized he wasn't alone. His pain was personal, but it belonged to something much larger. The fight for dignity, respect, and equality that stretched far beyond his own life. Still, the healing wasn't simple. There were nights he woke up drenched in sweat, his mind dragging him back into that restaurant, back to the fists, the shouts, the humiliation. Healing isn't a straight line. Racism doesn't just bruise bodies. It bruises futures, dreams, and trust. But Jordan refused to disappear into silence. Instead, he turned his suffering into strength. He began speaking in schools, sharing his story with kids who looked like him. Kids who whispered that they were scared every time they walked home alone, or every time they got stopped for no reason. To them, he wasn't just a victim. He was proof that survival is resistance, and speaking is power. And maybe that's the hardest part of his story. That no one should have to be strong just to exist. No teenager should be forced to carry the weight of educating a world that refuses to change. No family should have to wonder if their child will make it home because of the color of their skin. But until that world exists, voices like Jordan's matter more than ever. His story reminds us that racism isn't history. It's here. It hides in restaurants, in classrooms, in offices, in the quiet spaces where no one is watching. And it waits unless we refuse to let it breathe. So now the question falls to us. To me. To you. To everyone watching this story unfold. When you see injustice, will you turn away, or will you speak? When someone's dignity is stripped in front of you, will you stay silent, or will you stand? Because Jordan's story is not just his, it's ours. And every choice we make either feeds the silence, or breaks it. And maybe, just maybe, the next time hate walks into a room, it won't find quiet acceptance. It will find resistance. The resistance of truth. The resistance of unity. The resistance of people who refuse to let racism win. So I ask you now, what side of that moment will you stand on? What are your thoughts on Ethan Cole's story? After everything that unfolded inside that restaurant, do you believe the truth he revealed will change how people see him, or will society still judge him by the color of his skin? His courage forced the world to stop and look deeper, but the question is, will it truly last? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.